What happens when Hollywood's most beloved nice guy finally reaches his breaking point? You won't believe what unfolds when Keanu Reeves sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a light-hearted promotional interview, only to witness one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other, with the familiar sound of the house band and Jimmy's trademark smirk, as he welcomed viewers to what he promised would be a fun night with some amazing guests. The audience was buzzing with anticipation as Keanu Reeves was announced as the evening's main guest, promoting his latest project. What nobody expected was that within 30 minutes, this routine celebrity interview would spiral into television chaos, ending with one of Hollywood's most respected actors storming off set in disgust. The trouble began brewing the moment Keanu walked onto the stage. While the audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause, seasoned viewers of Jimmy's show might have noticed something different in the host's demeanor. Instead of his typical warm welcome, there was an edge to Jimmy's smile, a calculated gleam in his eyes that suggested tonight's interview wouldn't follow the usual promotional playbook. The first red flag came during Jimmy's opening monologue, where he made several pointed jokes about actors who think they're too cool for Hollywood politics and celebrities who stay mysteriously quiet about important issues. As Keanu settled into the guest chair, his usual calm and thoughtful presence seemed to fill the studio. The contrast between his genuine warmth and Jimmy's increasingly forced enthusiasm was palpable, even through the television screen. Jimmy launched into what appeared to be standard interview questions about Keanu's upcoming film, but there was an underlying tension that made veteran talk show watchers sit up and take notice. The questions themselves weren't unusual, but Jimmy's delivery carried a subtle aggression that seemed designed to provoke rather than promote. "So Keanu," Jimmy began with that trademark grin that somehow managed to look both friendly and predatory, "you've been pretty quiet lately about some of the major political conversations happening in Hollywood. I mean, we've got colleagues speaking out about everything from social justice to climate change, and you're just making movies. Some people are wondering if you actually care about anything beyond your next paycheck." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the usual softball question guests expected on a promotional tour. Keanu's response was measured and thoughtful, as always. "I think everyone has their own way of contributing to the world, Jimmy. For me, that's through the stories we tell and the way we treat the people around us on set and in life. I prefer to let my actions speak rather than making public declarations about every issue." But Jimmy wasn't satisfied with this diplomatic answer. He leaned forward with the persistence of a prosecutor, his voice taking on a mocking tone that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "Actions speak louder than words? That's interesting coming from someone who's made millions from violent action movies. I mean, you've literally built a career on gun violence, and yet when there's actual gun violence in schools, in communities, radio silence from Keanu Reeves. Doesn't that strike you as a little hypocritical?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Keanu's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. "I think you're making some assumptions about my personal beliefs and activities that aren't accurate, Jimmy. Just because I don't publicize every charitable contribution or political stance doesn't mean I'm not engaged with issues I care about." Jimmy's laugh had a sharp edge to it now, and he gestured dramatically to the audience as if they were all in on some joke that Keanu wasn't getting. "Oh, come on, Keanu. We're all friends here. Surely you can understand why people might find it convenient that Hollywood's supposed nice guy manages to stay above the fray while everyone else is taking risks and making statements. It's almost like you've calculated that staying neutral is better for your brand." The word "calculated" hung in the air like a challenge. Several audience members exchanged glances, sensing that this interview was veering dangerously off course from the typical celebrity chat show format. Keanu's posture shifted slightly, his characteristic zen-like calm showing the first hairline cracks. When he spoke, his voice was still controlled, but there was steel underneath the silk. "I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, Jimmy, but I think you might be confusing thoughtfulness with calculation. Some of us believe that before you speak publicly about complex issues, you should actually understand them deeply rather than just offering hot takes for applause." The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. Jimmy's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force, but now it looked more like a grimace. The audience could sense that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between host and guest. What had started as an interview was beginning to feel like an interrogation, and Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's most patient man, was clearly reaching the limits of his legendary composure. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and everyone present seemed to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented unfold in real time. The question hanging over everyone's heads was simple. How much further would Jimmy push before... Jimmy's eyes glinted with something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction as he watched Keanu's composed facade begin to crack. The host seemed to feed off the discomfort radiating from his guest, leaning back in his chair with the smugness of someone who believed they had gained the upper hand. What happened next would go down in talk show history as one of the most jaw-dropping moments of unprofessional behavior ever captured on live television. "You know what I find really interesting, Keanu?" Jimmy continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You talk about understanding issues deeply, but let's talk about something you should understand pretty well: loyalty. I mean, you've worked with some pretty problematic people over the years, haven't you? Directors who've had, shall we say, credible allegations made against them. And yet, silence from John Wick himself." The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with several people shifting in their seats and exchanging worried glances. Even the camera operators seemed unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. This was no longer an interview. It was character assassination disguised as celebrity chat. Keanu's hands, which had been resting calmly on the armrests of his chair, slowly clenched into fists. "Jimmy," Keanu said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level that somehow carried more menace than any shout could have, "I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making without evidence. If you have something specific to say, say it. Otherwise, maybe we should move on to discussing the actual reason I'm here." But Jimmy was like a shark who had tasted blood in the water. He practically vibrated with malicious energy as he pressed forward, apparently unable to resist pushing this confrontation to its absolute breaking point. "Oh, I'm sorry, did I strike a nerve? It's just funny how Hollywood's golden boy always manages to avoid getting his hands dirty while everyone else has to pick sides. Must be nice to float above it all while other people deal with the consequences of speaking truth to power." The audience was now openly uncomfortable, with some people actually covering their faces in secondhand embarrassment. The house band members were staring in disbelief, and even Jimmy's longtime sidekick looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. What they were witnessing wasn't entertainment. It was a professional meltdown happening in real time, broadcast to millions of viewers who had tuned in expecting light comedy and celebrity banter. Keanu stood up slowly, his full height suddenly seeming imposing in the bright studio lights. His voice, when he spoke, carried a weight that silenced every whisper in the audience. "You want to talk about truth to power, Jimmy? Let's talk about the truth. The truth is that you're sitting behind this desk, protected by your network and your writers, taking cheap shots at people who come here as guests because it makes you feel important. You think controversy equals relevance, but all you're really doing is showing everyone who you actually are when the cameras are rolling." Jimmy's face flushed red, but he couldn't seem to stop himself from digging deeper. "Oh, that's rich coming from someone who's built an entire persona around being the humble, mysterious movie star. You think you're better than everyone else? Because you don't engage with the messy parts of life. Well, newsflash, Keanu, your whole too cool for drama act is just another form of privilege, and some of us aren't impressed by it. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several audience members gasped audibly, and the tension in the studio reached a fever pitch that felt like it might explode at any moment. Keanu's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in the interview, his legendary patience finally showed. Signs of cracking completely. His next words would change everything, and everyone in that studio knew they were about to witness something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. "You want to see the real me, Jimmy?" Keanu asked, his voice deadly calm, but carrying an undertone that made everyone lean forward in their seats. "You want me to drop the act and show you what I really think about bullies who hide behind their platform to tear down guests who can't fight back on equal terms?" The studio fell into absolute silence, the kind of quiet that precedes either an explosion or a complete collapse. Jimmy's smirk was still plastered on his face, but his eyes showed the first flicker of uncertainty, as if he was finally beginning to realize that he might have pushed too far. The question wasn't whether this confrontation would escalate further, it was how spectacular the fallout would be when it finally did. What happened next will be replayed on social media forever. Keanu took a step closer to Jimmy's desk, his movements deliberate and controlled, but radiating an intensity that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. When he spoke, his voice cut through the silence like a blade, each word precisely chosen and devastatingly delivered. "You know what the difference is between us, Jimmy? When I make movies about violence, everyone knows it's fiction. But what you're doing right here, right now, attacking someone's character on national television without evidence, trying to destroy reputations for entertainment value, that's real violence. And you're doing it while hiding behind your writers, your producers, and your network executives who will protect you no matter how low you sink." Jimmy's face had gone from red to pale, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. If anything, being called out so directly seemed to trigger something primal in him, a desperate need to reassert dominance that overrode any remaining professional judgment. "Oh, spare me the lecture about violence, action hero. You've made millions glorifying gun culture, and now you want to play moral authority. That's the real joke here. You're just another Hollywood hypocrite who thinks his fame gives him the right to lecture the rest of us." The audience was now completely silent, watching this train wreck unfold with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Several people had their phones out, clearly recording what they sensed would become historic television. The camera operators continued filming, though their expressions suggested they couldn't believe what they were capturing. Keanu's laugh was unlike anything anyone had ever heard from him, cold, sharp, and completely devoid of his usual warmth. "You want to talk about hypocrisy? Let's examine your track record, Jimmy. How many guests have you ambushed like this? How many people have come on your show expecting a professional interview only to find themselves subjected to your personal therapy session disguised as entertainment? You sit here night after night, making jokes about other people's lives, their struggles, their mistakes, and you think that gives you moral high ground?" Jimmy was now visibly rattled, but like a wounded animal, he lashed out even more viciously. "At least I'm honest about who I am. At least I don't pretend to be some Zen master while benefiting from a system I'm too cowardly to criticize. You want to know what I think? I think you're scared. Scared that if you actually took a stand on anything, people might see through the nice guy act and realize you're just as flawed as everyone else." The words hit like a physical blow, and for a moment something flickered across Keanu's face that nobody had ever seen before: pure, unadulterated anger. When he responded, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But somehow every person in that studio heard every word with crystal clarity. "You think being flawed is something to be ashamed of? You think admitting you don't have all the answers makes you weak? That's where you're wrong, Jimmy. The difference between us isn't that I'm perfect and you're flawed. We're both human beings with our own struggles. The difference is that I don't use my platform to tear other people down to make myself feel better. I don't invite guests into my space and then attack them when they can't fight back on equal terms. Jimmy was now sweating visibly, but he couldn't seem to stop himself from continuing this self-destructive spiral. Equal terms? You're Keanu Reeves. You have more power and influence than I could ever dream of. Don't play the victim here when you could end my career with a single phone call. The studio erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Even Jimmy's most loyal audience members seemed shocked by this admission of insecurity and spite. Keanu shook his head slowly, and when he spoke, there was something almost sad in his voice, alongside the anger. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're not trying to hold me accountable for anything. You're trying to knock me down because you think it makes you look bigger. You've turned your show into a place where you can settle personal scores and work out your own insecurities at your guests' expense. And the worst part is, you're doing it while people trust you to be professional. Jimmy's mask was completely off now, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. You don't know anything about the pressure of doing this job night after night, having to be funny and relevant while people like you get to float above it all in your ivory towers. The confrontation had reached its absolute peak, with both men now standing facing each other across the desk that seemed like a battleground. The audience was completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something that would define both of these men's careers. The tension was so intense it felt like the air itself might shatter, and everyone present knew that whatever happened next would be the moment that. Keanu's voice, when it came, was like the calm before a devastating storm. You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I do have power and influence, and I've spent my entire career trying to use it responsibly, trying to lift people up instead of tearing them down. But watching you tonight, seeing how you treat guests in your own house, I'm realizing that sometimes staying silent isn't noble. It's enabling. Jimmy's face was now a mask of panic and rage as he sensed the conversation slipping completely beyond his control. Don't you dare turn this around on me. You came on my show, and if you can't handle a real conversation instead of the usual promotional softball questions, then maybe you're not as tough as your movies make you seem. The desperation in Jimmy's voice was palpable now, and several audience members actually cringed at the raw display of professional suicide happening before their eyes. But Keanu wasn't finished. He walked around the desk slowly, deliberately, until he was standing directly in front of Jimmy, close enough that their conversation became almost intimate, despite being broadcast to millions. A real conversation? Keanu's voice was deadly quiet now, each word carrying the weight of years of accumulated disappointment in human behavior. Jimmy, this isn't a conversation. This is you having a public breakdown and using me as your punching bag. You've confused cruelty with courage and bullying with bravery. And the saddest part is, you're doing it in front of all these people who trusted you to be better. Jimmy's response was the final nail in his own professional coffin. Better? Better? I've been carrying this show for years while Hollywood prima donnas like you coast on your reputations. You think you're so much better than everyone else, but you're just another actor who got lucky and now thinks his opinions matter more than everyone else's. The studio erupted in shocked gasps and uncomfortable murmurs. Even Jimmy's longtime band leader was shaking his head in disbelief. What they were witnessing wasn't just a career-ending meltdown. It was a complete destruction of everything Jimmy had built over years of late-night television. Keanu stood perfectly, still for a long moment, letting Jimmy's words hang in the air like an indictment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a finality that everyone in the room recognized as the end of something significant. You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had everything. You had a platform, an audience, the trust of millions, of people who invited you into their homes every night. And you threw it all away because you couldn't handle your own insecurities without making them everyone else's problem. I came here tonight to talk about a film I'm proud of, to connect with people who might enjoy it. Instead, I got to see who you really are when you think the cameras are protecting you. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, but his voice cracked with the strain of his own destruction. The cameras are protecting me. This is my show, my network, my audience. You can't just walk away when things get real. Keanu's smile was sad, almost pitying, as he looked down at Jimmy one final time. Watch me. He turned toward the audience, his demeanor instantly transforming back into the gracious, respectful person they all knew him to be. I want to apologize to everyone who came here tonight, expecting something better than this. You deserved a host who would treat his guests with basic human decency, and you deserved entertainment that didn't come at the expense of someone's dignity. I hope you'll still check out the film. It's something we're all very proud of, and it was made with love and respect for everyone involved. The audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. Several people stood up, then more, until nearly the entire audience was on their feet. Not for Jimmy or his show, but for the dignity and grace Keanu had shown even in the face of such unprofessional treatment. Jimmy stood frozen behind his desk, his face cycling through expressions of rage, humiliation, and dawning realization of what he had just done to himself on live television. The applause felt like both vindication for Keanu and a funeral dirge for Jimmy's career. Keanu walked toward the exit with the same measured pace he'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation, but just before disappearing behind the curtain, he turned back one final time. His words carried clearly across the still applauding studio. Jimmy, I genuinely hope you get the help you need, and I hope someday you understand that being vulnerable doesn't require making other people small. With that, Keanu Reeves walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage for what everyone present knew would be the last time, leaving behind a host whose career had just imploded in spectacular fashion, an audience that had witnessed television history, and a moment that would be dissected and discussed for years to come. Within hours, clips of the confrontation had gone viral across every social media platform. The hashtag #KeanuWasRight began trending worldwide, while Jimmy Kimmel Meltdown became a cautionary tale about what happens when ego and insecurity override professionalism. Network executives were reportedly in emergency meetings before the show had even finished airing, and by morning, industry insiders were already speculating about Jimmy's future in late-night television. The confrontation that had started as a routine promotional interview had ended, with one of the most respected actors in Hollywood walking away with his dignity intact, while one of television's longtime hosts faced a reckoning that would define the rest of his career. In the end, the real winner wasn't determined by who got the last word, but by who maintained their humanity when it mattered most.